And before we officially get started, it's my duty, my privilege, and my responsibility to share with you all that VocalEye is broadcasting to you this evening from the unceded, ancestral, and occupied territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And as we are all joining this evening from the magic of Zoom, some in the future, some in the present, nobody from the past, I don't think. But I just want to acknowledge that the power of Zoom brings us all together in one space, but we're all settled on different occupied lands. And in your own time, in your own way, would love to encourage you all to acknowledge the lands that you're settled on and to find some way to honor those lands. For myself, it was a beautiful sunny day here in Vancouver. And I'm not going far from home these days, but I have a beautiful, huge tree outside the front of my yard. And it's almost twice as high as the power line. So it's a huge tree. It's obviously been there for hundreds of years, if not longer. And when I think about this tree, I think about the folks that were here way before I was here and try to just, I don't know, create some sort of connection to that land and to the spirit of the people that took care of this land before I was or am settled on it. So that's my acknowledgement, and I hope that you all take the time to acknowledge the lands that you're on. Tonight, we are going to experience our virtual VocalEye number 45. I did say 45. Every week, we add another number to that little checklist. Who's Chinatown is what we're featuring tonight. And this is a virtual tour from the Griffin Projects in North Vancouver. Hey, I live in North Vancouver. And tonight, Jessa, who is our visual arts programmer, is going to take us through that programming and then stick around for a more robust Q&A at the end. And we'll also be inviting Karen Tam for the Q&A at the event. And she is the individual who curated this particular event and is joining us from Montreal. So also joining us from the future this evening. So that's lovely. For those of you who don't know me, if this is the first time in this space, my name is Amy. I'm the community outreach coordinator for VocalEye. My pronouns are she, hers. And I am honored to be your host this evening. And I just want to, acknowledge and thank those who have made financial contributions, donations to VocalEye. This programming is offered free of charge, and there is no obligation to make any donation, but there's always a link in the chat where you can find it on our website. If you feel like you have the capacity to do that, it's greatly welcomed. And just a reminder to folks that we do something very different every week. And sometimes you may find that it's not really your thing. And sometimes it might be exactly your thing. That's just sort of reflective of the real arts world, isn't it? We don't experience everything, but we really want to bring a very eclectic art experience to this space so that people have a really well-versed understanding of the art that's out there. I know for me, I didn't know anything about Baroque music until we had a Baroque night. So I learned a whole bunch that night. Here's what's coming up, and it's important for you all to know that May 26th, we will not have programming because it's part of VocalEye's Day of the Long Weekend. In Canada, we have a long weekend. Even though it's a Wednesday, VocalEye is going to take this particular day off. But we will be back on June the 2nd, and this is part of the International Access Awareness Week. We're going to feature Imagine Van Gogh, which is a virtual art tour. With our visual arts programmer, Jessa. So Imagine Van Gogh is happening. I think there's a little crowdsourced description happening that night too, with some Van Gogh pieces. So that's June the 2nd. And then June the 9th, and I'll let you do the research after that, but June the 9th is going to be an opera at the movies night. And so we're going to welcome one of our community members, Julia, who's probably on this call somewhere tonight. And she's a professional opera singer. So she's going to lead us through opera arias as they're featured in the movies. So things that we may have heard from some of our favorite movies, and then have a chat and an introductory, space to talk about opera from the perspective of an opera singer and a professional in the industry. And so we're going to break down some of the misconceptions and make it accessible for everybody. So I'm really looking forward to that, because opera for me was one of those things that I was like, nope, I don't understand it. I don't want to know. But now, the older I get, the more I really am interested in what opera is all about. So I hope you'll join us all for that. Okay, friends, we're bringing Jessa into the fold. Jessa, where are you, my friend?
Hello, everyone. Nice to be back. Hope you had a good week.
Glad to have you, as always. Jessa, we're going to experience Who's Chinatown tonight. So we had a question earlier from one of the, what Chinatown are we going to see? So unpack for us a little bit about what we're going to experience in Who's Chinatown.
Yes, so this is an exhibition that was put on, by the Griffin Arts Project in North Vancouver, and it involves bringing together artworks, photographs, artifacts, paper materials from the past and present that are exploring all kinds of ideas around Chinatown. Specifically, we're looking at some artworks and historic pieces from Vancouver's Chinatown, but also Toronto and Montreal. And Karen Tam, who you'll have the chance to meet later tonight, she's the curator and she's also an artist, and she's been exploring, she's Chinese Canadian herself, and she's been exploring ideas around Chinese identity and restaurant spaces in Chinatowns for many years. And so she put on her curator hat and she brought together all kinds of gems that you never see in a museum or that you rarely see. And then she brought old things and new things together. So I'll be giving you a taste of 7 different slides from that show, and then she'll join us later to give us more stories and answer your questions.
Awesome. And as we get into this, just a reminder to folks again that as Jessa is sharing slides and talking about the experiences and the describing of these images in the slides, please, if you have questions about what's in the slide, you're not understanding something that's being described, this is an opportunity for you to use the raise your hand function and just come on in and join the conversation. So we're going to do this totally, I'm going to call it informally with a tad bit of structure, because we can't just have everybody do a free for all on mute, but I do welcome the opportunity for folks to ask their questions as we go along, because I think it's really important. Certainly, I'm sure I'll have lots of questions as I don't see the images very well either. And we've got Jessa here to unpack them visually for us. So that's wonderful. Jessa, what was your experience in curating, I guess, taking this curated virtual tour and then bringing it to our audience here for VocalEye?
Yeah, it's been interesting because every curator makes choices about which artwork to put together, what the story is they want to share. And then for a tour like this, I'm just picking highlights. So it's a challenge to ask, well, what are the key ideas I want everyone to know about? What are sort of the few gems that scrape the surface? And luckily the gallery and a lot of the galleries we partner with, they sent us a lot of information and photos and stories about the artworks, like a lot of research. So it was fun working with them, and they were excited that people would be experiencing the show who wouldn't maybe normally get to see it or experience it. So it's been interesting to try to do my best to show a few of the interesting gems that Karen Tam brought together, and we'll experience them tonight.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other questions I have from you, and this may seem like a silly question, but the Griffin Project is out of North Vancouver. But I guess my question is, the physical space of this gallery is not in North Vancouver, or is? Or because Karen is in Montreal, and that's not North Vancouver. That's, a few provinces away and several time zones away. So unpack that for us.
So she came out here and followed all the COVID rules and things and quarantined and such. And so she was here for a while working in the gallery space. And so sometimes artists and curators will travel before COVID, and in the coming months, we'll get back to that. And so she's back in Montreal now where she works usually, but sometimes we have a chance for a voice from far away to come and make a show for us or bring ideas forward.
So there is a physical space in North Vancouver that's housing these objects. And, for context, where in North Vancouver is that? Do you know?
I can't remember the address offhand, but Google Maps.
Google Maps. Okay. But I guess that, because this was marketed as a virtual tour, part of me was curious about where the physical was living. And so there is a space in North Vancouver where it's physically living.
There is, yes. They have a gallery building where.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Not that I think any of us will physically get to be in the gallery building, but that's why we're doing our own version of a virtual tour. Anything else you want to share with us in our last couple of minutes here, Jessa, about what we're going to experience, what you think is important to set up the world that we're entering into?
Ask questions. I'll be showing you about 7 slides or so, and after I share a description, ask questions at any time. That's the way I teach in museums and classrooms, so I'm glad we can do that here. Amusingly, I didn't realize this when we started this project, but I know Karen Tam from many years ago when I did my master's research on Asian Canadian artists and art spaces and culture. And she was one of the artists that I interviewed and I worked with. So 10 years later, we collide again through the community of VocalEye. So it's funny sometimes how people work together and then they come back together in events like this. So if we sound excited to talk to each other, that's why.
Well, I'm excited to have Karen here to talk to our audience, to share with us from like a lived experience perspective, right? Because you and I are not Asian Canadians. I'm a white woman. Jessa, would you like to identify?
I'm part Irish, part English, and so I come to Chinatown spaces as a visitor, as someone who loves Chinese food. I love dishes. I love going there, but it's very different when your family or your community comes from that history. So yeah, it'll be great to hear Karen's personal stories a bit later.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that piece of it, because again, as a visitor of Chinatown spaces, I often don't find myself having conversations with folks that are can talk to me about the history or their life experience. And I think part of one of the beautiful things that VocalEye offers in this platform is that opportunity to be able to just ask your questions, and we'll make this a safe space and a judgment-free zone. We'll set that up again when Karen joins. So if you have questions, or if you have experiences of as some of the folks were saying in our social earlier, they've experienced Chinatown. So what have been your experiences, in the Chinatowns in your communities? I think that would also be a welcome point of conversation. So
yeah, and I know we have members in our group who are Chinese Canadian and whose families have long histories. So yes,
yeah.
Many voices tonight.
This is going to be a great night to be able to learn from a variety of perspectives, curated originally by Karen and then taken on by you for this space. Yeah. So that's great. My clock reads 7:00 Pacific time. And I think what we'll do, Jessa, is we'll have you introduce the first slide that you're going to share with us. This is Who's Chinatown?
Okay, so the first image that I'm showing you is an image of 2 rooms in the gallery space. And then in the future, the images we'll be looking at will be more focused on 1 or 2 individual artworks. So this gallery space, it's a big room, and what we have in this photo is there's a wall divider that's separating 2 of the rooms from each other. And I'll start from the right-hand side of the photo all the way to the left, just to sort of give you a sense of the space, and then we'll actually look more closely at some of the artwork.
So this is the actual gallery space in North Vancouver.
That's right.
All right.
So on the right-hand side, in the first room that we're in, on the right-hand side, there's a wall that has blue and white wallpaper, and it has some framed artwork on it. And we're going to come back to that wall a little bit later when we look at it closely. And then moving towards your left, we're on one of the divider walls, and it features 6 very small photographs that are framed in white matte frames on a white wall. And there's a white table in front of them that I presume would have artifacts and things inside of it. So that corner is sort of in the room that we're standing in. And then as we move more to the left, there's a big open doorway that we can see through to the second room. And we will go there a little bit later. But from where we are, looking into that room over to the left, through off in the distance, there is a sculpture that is made of wood, and it's transparent, and it's full of vertical and horizontal wooden pieces. And it's building a Chinese gate, the kind of gates that are often overarching the streets of Chinatowns around Canada and probably in the United States as well. And we will talk about that arch closer in a few minutes, but for now you can see through that wooden gate through to a mint green wall that's along the back. And up in the corner of that green wall is a glowing yellow neon sign, and it actually reflects a yellow glow on the gray shiny concrete floor. And that sign actually is in Chinese, and it's 2 characters. One is Xian and one is Hua, so Xian Hua, and it's by an artist named Paul Wong. And this glowing sign of 2 Chinese characters means limit and Chinese in English. And this neon glowing sign is speaking to a time in Canadian history when it was illegal for Chinese people to immigrate here. There were taxes, heavy, heavy taxes the Canadian government was putting on Chinese immigrants. And there was a period from 1925 until the 1960s when it was illegal for Chinese people to immigrate to Canada at all. So it's this brightly colored sign, but it's reminding us of a very racist time in Canadian history when Chinese people were not treated equally and were not welcome here. So it's colorful, but also a little bit, somber as well.
What I think is interesting about you calling it colorful, and I've had the privilege of seeing what a neon sign looks like when I had my full sight, which kind of reminds me of like the lights in Vegas. Have you ever heard of the lights in Vegas? Like, it's neon everywhere. But the idea is that for me, how this translates is I'm so bright, I'm in your face, I'm not going to let you forget.
That's great. Yeah.
Right? Like that, like what other choice is there about choosing neon than to tell your audience, I'm here. You're not gonna, you're not gonna get by without noticing me. Because as you pointed out, there was a time in history where that was not the case. So that once you unpack that for me, that resonates, the visual of that resonates very differently.
That is a great point, Amy. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Oh my gosh, I'm like a junior art historian / curator myself. Quite proud of myself. No, I'm
proud of you. And we're all learning, so we can all feel like we're growing in our art history or our art experience. So thank you for that.
Are there any other things that you'd like to share with us, Jessa, about this particular opening image, which really just sets up the gallery space that you're going to go into a little bit more detail about?
For the moment, those are kind of the highlights, just kind of imagining these two rooms flowing together, and we'll come back to a few of these spots as we go through the session tonight.
Okay, awesome. I'm excited.
All right, next slide, Rick. So this is a photograph of that wall I mentioned that is blue and white wallpaper, and it has two paintings on it. So the wallpaper, you can imagine the wall first. It's a white surface with these very small blue drawings, and it's wallpaper, but it's likely been hand drawn and then printed. And they feature little sketches from people and spaces around Chinatown, whether it's in Vancouver or elsewhere. So for instance, we see tiny drawings of the big arches that are often 2 or 3 stories tall, the big Chinese gates that go over top of the streets of Chinatowns. We see stone lions that are often part of those gates, and the lion has a paw on a globe or on an orb, and so that's another reference to the gates. We have little sketches of shops that have apartments above them and busy signs and doors and windows with Chinese characters below, so like shop buildings. There's also sketches of people and homes, and so it just gives you a sense of like the little moments of Chinatown made into a wallpaper. So that's the blue and white wall. And then I want to focus on the 2 framed artworks that are on that wall. So on the right-hand side, it's a painting in a light brown frame with a white kind of paper mat around the picture in the center. It's vertical, so it's a portrait kind of vertical orientation. And it's a watercolor painting by Victoria or Canadian-based artist Emily Carr back in the 1920s and 30s. She was a notable modern painter here on the West Coast. And this is a painting of a Chinese boy. And he's sitting in the middle of the painting. He's sitting on a little box. And Rick is zooming in for us, which is really helpful. Thank you, Rick. And he's sitting, just kind of squatting down in this little box, and he's dressed in gray clothing. So kind of a light gray coat on top and darker gray pants. And there's lots of shadow kind of in and around his legs. And he's looking straight at us. And I'm not sure if his hair is short or if it's long. Maybe it's pulled in a ponytail or maybe it's short, but he's staring at us, squatting on this little box. And in his hands, in his left hand, he's holding something. It could be a fruit, it could be some kind of food. And on the right-hand side, he's holding a little knife. So he seems to be carving or cutting something. And there's a little white bowl at his feet where he's got more of these things. So maybe he's peeling a fruit or something like that, and he's got a little bowl catching it underneath near his feet. So he's sitting there looking at us, and there's a sort of peachy orange wall behind him, and the ground that he's sitting on with his box is kind of a light brown color. And because it's watercolor, it's a very kind of soft, kind of transparent, kind of pastel kind of effect to the paint, because it's a very watery paint. It's not a dark painting. And so this painting, Karen Tam included it because it's a reminder that Emily Carr had interactions with Chinese people in Victoria, even though it was a time in history when there was a lot of racism. Her family hired a little boy named Bong who worked at their home, and she in her diaries would talk about him like singing to their family cows. And she also had friends who were Chinese artists. Although there's no art that was kept from these people, they didn't make it in the main art market. Her diaries remind us that they existed and they were part of people that she knew in Victoria. So this is a painting of a European Canadian woman who's remembering and showing us Chinese Canadians in the 1930s in Victoria.
Just for a little bit of context, Jessa, because not everybody's from the Vancouver area, they may not know who Emily Carr is. So if you could maybe just give us some context around the artist of this piece, that might be a little helpful.
Absolutely. And maybe one day we'll do a session on her. So she's noted for doing modern landscapes, and she would paint a lot of Indigenous poles and really look at the natural world and also the presence of Indigenous people in the 1910s and 20s and 30s in Canada when nobody was doing that. And so we have a university here named after her, Emily Carr University. And when people think of Canadian art, she's definitely one of these artists that you often see in Canadian painting shows. Emily Carr is probably going to be in that show.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. So Rick, if you can take us to the left, there's one more painting on this wall, and it's very dark. It's dark no matter how much vision someone might have, but I'll include it because it's on the same wall. So this is a very dark oil painting, and it must be nighttime. Everything is in such shadow. And on the left-hand side is a black doorway, like a black shadowy doorway with some stone stairs going up into the darkness. And it's a dark brown building. On the right-hand side is a dark window with dark green shutters. And there's a man in dark brown, black clothes, and you can see a little bit of orange where his head would be. And he's kind of hunched over and stooped over, and he's walking past the window, walking towards the left. And the building behind him is a very dark brown with what looks like scraps of old posters. So kind of some orange rectangles, and then to the left, a little red rectangle, and then above it, just near the doorway, is this tall brown rectangle with possibly some Chinese characters on it. So you get a feeling it's kind of a rundown building with some old posters, and it's a dark, shadowy moment in time. And this is a painting from 1915 from Montreal, so of Chinatown in Montreal, by an artist named John Johnson. So Emily Carr's was from 1908, sorry, and this one is from 1915. So they're just two paintings that are looking at two Chinatowns in Canada 100 years ago, painted from a European perspective.
It's an interesting place to start when we talk about who's Chinatown, is that we're starting from a European perspective. So I have to imagine that there was a reason for it being curated in this way, because it's the first room you experience as you go through the exhibit.
The show is mostly featuring voices from Chinese and Chinese Canadian backgrounds, but in this room, she's looking at sort of the personal sides, the more intimate views that people have, whether it's from that community or people from European Canadians who are looking at the community. So this room also features other portraits, photographs, flyers from Chinese students who are part of art schools in Vancouver. So it's kind of like a more intimate look at the people of Chinatown before we get into the buildings and that sort of thing.
Right. Awesome. What are just, so we have,
sorry, I just raised my hand a little bit
go ahead,
ago,
Rita.
and I just want to ask, okay, this is going back to the Chinese gates that you were talking about, the arches with the gates.
Sure, yeah.
Are those like, do they hold people in or out? Is that like a ghetto or something? What are the gates like?
So those gates that are in many Chinatowns still today, they're often very elaborately decorated with lots of paint and gold and red and Chinese characters and lions and very, very tall. They're more like celebratory gates, like they're more like symbolic gates, and they're part of a lot of temple architecture. And you see big architectural gates in China and Japan and Korea. So they're meant more as like a a bright marker that you're coming into a Chinatown community, but they're not meant as actual physical barriers. They're more like symbolic archways that welcome people in.
Okay, great, thanks.
Great question.
And we can also get Karen's perspective on that. So if you remember that question when Karen joins us later, Rita, because I'd love to hear what Karen's thoughts are about these gates as well.
That's a great idea.
My experience with them in my sighted world, my sighted life, was that they are quite beautiful. They're enormous. They're like a show-stopping piece. But from a lived perspective, I actually have the same question that Rita has, which is, you know, are they created by the community? Are they meant to welcome people in? Are they meant to keep people out? All of those pieces. So thank you for sharing that with us, Jessa. And let's remember to ask Karen too, from her perspective.
That's a
what
great
those
idea.
gates are all about.
Okay, we'll ask Karen about the gates a bit later.
Awesome. Okay.
Mind. All right, next slide. Is there any other questions about these two paintings?
There aren't any other hands up. I guess my only other question would have been just to, you know, they're portraits, but like, what's the scale of these? Are they large paintings? Are they small? You know, how do we scalize these?
So the Emily Carr painting, which was the first I've talked about of the little boy, it would probably be about as big from your elbow to your wrist. So they're not huge. They would be much more portable. And then the painting on the left is quite small as well, only that one's a bit more horizontal. So it would be smaller, the one on the left would be smaller than your elbow to your wrist.
And was that typical of the early 1900s? You know, just sort of, I don't know, I guess it just, you know, like 1908, 1915, but were smaller portraits or small, yeah, I guess they're portraits, but were smaller pieces of art typical of that time period in Canada?
It just depended if you were often making a big commission, a small commission, but if you're painting outdoors and both of these look like outdoor scenes, it's easier to carry a small canvas with you or a small piece of paper and then do that painting outdoors in a very portable way. So likely they were outside to paint both of these. So having something small with them would be easier to paint than a big canvas.
Awesome. That puts a whole new thought process in my mind around smaller pieces of work now. When I encounter them, I'm going to wonder if they were painted inside or outside. It's great context. Okay, I think you're ready to move on to your next slide when you're ready.
Next slide, please. Okay, so this is in the same idea around people looking at or documenting painting, but now with photos, looking at Chinatown at different times in history. So this is a photograph of photographs, and we'll zoom in on them so that you can catch a glimpse of them if that's helpful for you. And so this photo shows us 6 color photographs from the 1950s and 60s, and they are framed in a white, big fat mat, like maybe 2 inches of white mat around each photograph, and then a white frame on a white wall. So the photos are color, but everything else is white. And we're going to zoom in and we're going to start, if you think of it like a clock, we're going to start at 12 o'clock at the very top, and then we're going to go clockwise around and we'll finish in the center of the clock. So these are photographs by Fred Herzog, and he was a street photographer for many, many years in Vancouver. And he photographed Vancouver in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, before it was sort of the big glass condo city that it is now. So kind of a working class city. And in this photograph, the first one that we're looking at, it's from 1950s and 60s, and it shows a Black Canadian father and his daughter on the right-hand side, walking down a street in Chinatown. And so they're on the right-hand side of the photograph, and it's a sunny day, and so there's some shadows on the sidewalk below them. And he's dressed in a black suit with a white hat and smart tie and a little, probably a pocket square coming out of his left pocket. And he is walking, and his daughter, he's holding her with his left hand. With his right hand, he has a feisty little black dog. It could be a terrier or a schnauzer, and it's kind of pulling on the leash. So the leash is kind of pulling out in front of him, but he's very smartly dressed, and his dog is trotting out in front. And the little girl that he's holding with his left hand, she's kind of on the right bottom corner of the photo. She's walking with a long, oversized light blue coat that must have been the fashion of the time, but it's very long on her. It comes down below her knees. She might be 4 years old. She's very small. And then she's got little white socks and little black shoes. And so this father and daughter are walking down the street from the right, kind of towards the center of the photograph. And behind them, on the right-hand side, top right corner, We can see a red and white striped awning over a window, over a shop window, and the building is white, and it has some orange posters just to the left of the shop window and some black Chinese characters painted on the wall. And then moving towards the center of the photo, just behind the dad, is a doorway that's all the wood, like all the wood trim is painted green, and there's some Chinese characters in the middle of it. And then moving a bit more to the left is a shop window with more Chinese characters on the window, but the blinds are drawn, so we're not sure what's inside the window. And then below the window is a red wall. So lots of color on that shop window, that shop front, lots of green and red. And then moving finally to the left-hand side of the photograph, we can see quite clearly into this shop window. It's a dishes store. So it's got sunlight shining upon white and blue dishes, some dark kind of purpley brown dishes. Some of them are urns, some of them are plates and bowls. And so you can imagine someone goes there to buy a whole dining set if they need to. So you get a sense of this family walking past very different shop fronts on that street in Chinatown in Vancouver in the 1950s.
And are we assuming that they are shoppers? Because they certainly, the way you described their dress, seems to me that they are people of status for their time.
Yeah, they could be in their Sunday best. They could be going out to something important. Maybe they're shopping. Maybe they're walking to church, walking to a family gathering. We're not quite sure. Maybe they'll go into the shops, but it's not clear.
Okay.
But historically, the Black working class neighborhood, Hogan's Alley in Vancouver, bumped up against Chinatown. So you'd see all kinds of people mixing and walking through the streets, just like in this moment here.
Awesome.
Yeah. So Rick, can we go to the next photo? So we're kind of moving down the clock, down to maybe like 2 o'clock. This is a very busy photo. It's a vertical photo, and it shows the hustle and bustle of people on a sidewalk that's just going dead straight in front of us. Like we're looking right down the sidewalk as far as the eye can see. And we see some people in the foreground, they're possibly Chinese Canadian, that are dressed in gray pants and lighter gray jacket and a red hat. There's a person on the left dressed like that. And in the center, there's a girl in a white dress with a light blue cardigan. And she's talking to a boy beside her that's just on the right, who's also dressed in dark pants, a button-up shirt, and a red hat. So we see two people with those red hats in this picture. And then as it goes off into the distance, it's really hard to tell. We just see people coming and going, hustle and bustle. And the top part of the photo is really where you see a lot of colorful awnings that are jutting out of all these shop windows. And some of them are dark green with white characters telling you what kind of shop they are. And right near the top, we actually see this flag that is draped between a building and a lamppost. So it's right across the sidewalk, and it's got these vertical stripes. On the left-hand side, there's a vertical stripe in salmon pink, and then a big thick stripe in dark green. And then moving to the right, a dark yellow, then a dark red, then a sky blue, then a lavender, then a navy blue, then a white, and a black, and a teal. So that striped flag is kind of crossing over the whole sidewalk above our heads from the building on the left to the lamppost on the right. And then finally at the very top, there's this neon sign. It's not turned on right now, but it's a neon sign that's sticking out from the building on the left. So it's sticking out perpendicular, and it says Kuo Kong Silk in white letters on a red background. And then there's also some Chinese characters below the English. And then below that, it says Oriental Silk and Curios. And this was a store that historically had a very long history in Chinatown. So it's a reminder of some stores in Chinatown have been there for over 100 years, several generations running them. And you get a sense in this photo of the chaos of color and signs and people in a straight sidewalk that kind of goes straight away from where we're standing.
Yeah, it's quite with my partial, it's quite visually, it's like visually stimulating, a little bit overloading because I can't pick out any of the details. So I appreciate the description. I wonder if you know, and maybe it's an unfair question to ask, but this flag that you described, do you know or have any idea what this symbolic references to this particular type flagged material?
That's a great question. Sadly, I don't. I know a little bit about the Cool Kong silk being a historic business in Chinatown, but in the research that we have, maybe Karen knows a bit more. Why
Because
sometimes
I guess I wonder if it's considered a flag, or if I wonder if it's like samples of the silk.
that's a
You know, like these are the
possibility.
colors that the silk comes in. It's like part of the advertising
That
of
would be
the
smart.
business. Because I can't quite conceptualize the multitude of colors here. So I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Karen does, and I might forget to ask her, but thank you for hearing my thoughts.
No, I think it's a great possibility, because lots of characters, lots of full windows, lots of color. It's how you get people to know your shop and come in. So I would not be surprised. I think your theory is quite a possible theory.
Interesting. All right. Thanks for this one.
Let's go down a bit further. And if these photographs feel a bit busy, it's because sometimes the streets definitely feel busy. So ask anything if it helps. This one is a quieter photo. There's actually no hustle and bustle in this photograph. It's a vertical photo of a man selling fish. And he's an older gentleman, maybe in his 60s or 70s, and he's selling maybe fresh fish caught in Vancouver, and he's laid out newspapers all over the sidewalk, and there's these dishes where he has the catch of the day. And so he's in the center of the photograph, and he's dressed in maybe a black jacket with a white button-up shirt and maybe a sweater as well. He has a gray hat. It has a black ribbon just around the brim, and he's squatting down on a little stool or a little box. So he's dead center in the photograph, but he's looking off to the left of the photo. Maybe he's looking for someone who's coming down the street. But he seems very relaxed, and then all around his feet are different newspapers all laid out, and then dishes or little containers that hold some of the things that he's selling. And then just on the right bottom corner of the photo near his knee is a paper bag. So maybe he has more things in there that he's selling. Behind him is a dark shop front. So directly behind him is a shop window. And at the very top in the dark window, you can see this arc on the window of English words that say Shang Shang and Company. So maybe that's the name of the shop owner. And so that's arcing along the top of the dark window. And then there's two vertical Chinese characters just below. So you can imagine that's sort of like the branding, the shopkeeper's name on their window. And through the window, we can see different containers. They're kind of like barrels of some sort that are on the inside. And we're not sure, I mean, there was no information about the photo to know what kind of shop this was, but maybe someone who knows more about Chinese goods and that sort of thing might recognize them. And then to the left, you see a green door. So everything on this shop front is painted dark green, and it has a window, but the blind has been drawn. So you get a sense it's like a dark shop that maybe it's not open, but he's set up his little paper set up for his fish selling right there in front of this dark green shop window.
So in front of this dark green shop, like this, he's on the sidewalk, right?
Exactly, yes.
Okay, I get it. So he's a little bit like a street vendor.
Exactly.
Of the times. Okay. And sorry, Jessa, I know that you said this is a photograph.
Yes.
But it's so, with my partial, it looks like an oil painting.
That's a great point.
Right? So is there something about the quality of the photograph?
So it has this painterly quality because there's so much shadow and darkness, like kind of a moodiness to it. And he's sort of glowing in the middle of the photo with his lighter skin and that paper bag near his feet. I agree, it does have sort of a dark, moody oil painting feeling about it. And I would think that's because of the lighting, the shadow and light, and the way the photo is developed. It might have a soft look about it. But it's interesting, sometimes paintings can look like photos and photos can look like paintings.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So let's keep going to the next. So we're going down the clock.
Sorry, we've got a hand. I just want to.
Yes. Always.
Yeah. So Megan has a question. Just give Megan a moment to unmute.
What part of Vancouver was this?
So all of this is in Chinatown of Vancouver. So
Ah.
yeah, Yeah, so Fred Herzog, for decades, he was walking the streets of Vancouver, taking photos of all sorts of people, all sorts of neighborhoods, and these happened to be a handful of his many, many photos that he took of Chinatown.
Nice. Oh, I like that. I think I've been there once.
Nice.
I don't remember. Yeah, I think I have actually, but I don't remember when. It was a long time ago. A long time ago.
Oh, great.
Jessa, is there a way to sort of contextualize where Chinatown is located in Vancouver?
Yeah, that's
folks?
really great. Yeah.
Okay, so if we are flying above Vancouver, looking down, the mountains are going to be to the north and down, and then there's water, and then there's downtown Vancouver. This is sort of moving towards Main Street. I know that means very little to those of us, but this is sort of in central downtown, maybe east downtown. It's not far west. So we call it East Van. We kind of refer to it moving towards East Vancouver on a map.
Awesome, thanks. And not so far away from like the waterfront.
Oh yeah, you could walk from Chinatown, walk north towards the water. You could walk there in less than 10 minutes. And then if you could also walk from Chinatown south and hit more water, because we actually have a downtown Vancouver is a peninsula. So there's actually water north and south of downtown Vancouver. So you can walk to both bodies of water from Chinatown.
And not so far from Gastown either, for folks who are sort of familiar with the general idea.
Yeah. So Gastown is on the north side of downtown Vancouver, if you're imagining it aerially. And Gastown is from the 1800s. Chinatown was also from the 1800s. And so they're a similar time in history.
Okay, thanks, Jessa.
Great, thanks. All right, let's keep going down the clock. Got 3 more photos. So zooming in on this one, we are looking at there's 3 people who are standing on a sidewalk, and in the center of the photograph is a staircase going down. And it reminds us there's lots of businesses that are in the basement of some of these shops. Not everything is above ground. On the right-hand side, we can see tiles on the ground that are leading up to a door that's wooden, that has a glass vertical window that says Hotel Garden. So I imagine it's a hotel that was in Chinatown in the 50s. And just near the door, there is an older gentleman who is sitting on a crate in dark jeans, red plaid shirt, gray cardigan, and a gray news cap. And he's reading the newspaper, and he has his cane leaning over his knees. So he's just relaxing there in front of the doorway of that hotel. He might be European Canadian, he might be Chinese Canadian, but it's hard to tell because he's looking down, so we're not sure. So he's on the right-hand side. In the middle of the photograph is a staircase leading down. And there's a little boy with black hair, and he's facing away from us, and he's sitting on the top step looking down. Maybe he's talking to someone, maybe there's something, the shop downstairs, he's looking down there. And he's leaning against a pillar that is dark green. And when you move your attention upwards, there is a beige area, like a beige kind of rectangle area with black Chinese characters on it. And then there's a whole beige wall that's leading down the stairs. And it says, Ho Sun Hing Company Printing, Lithography and Rubber Stamps. And then a dark red arrow on the wall that goes down the stairs. And we're going to mention this a bit later. This Ho Sun Hing Printing Company is connected to another artwork I want to show you in a few minutes. So this is a reminder that downstairs you could go for all kinds of printing services with the Ho Sun Hing Company. And then on the far left of the photo, just beside that little boy in that green pillar, is a Chinese Canadian gentleman. And he's standing looking towards the center of the photo. And he has a gray hat. And he's wearing a soft gray and white plaid jacket. He's got a bit of a barrel chest and a larger belly and a white shirt on, and then black pants. And then over towards the left past him, we see shadows and other doorways. So it gives you a sense of people waiting or reading or relaxing or just standing in the doorways of shops. And then that main staircase with that printing shop that goes downstairs is kind of the focal point.
What I notice about this picture, I don't even know how to describe it, but the wall that you described as beige with the writing on it seems, the only way I can say it is it seems dirty
Yeah,
in
yeah.
some way. So is this like shadows of the artwork, or is this like a wall that's, just been here for so long that it's maybe it's full of, I don't know, printing.
Oh, I imagine it's probably just the grit and dust of urban cities in the 1950s. So she's absolutely right. You're right, Amy. There's a bit of a dusty smudginess near the stairs, near the edges. So you get a sense this wall has not been cleaned for many, many years.
And again, I don't know if I'm interpreting this correctly, but it gives me this this feeling that this part of town was I don't know, like I want to say that it felt like it was run down a little bit, but maybe that's just the era of the 1950s and that's how I'm interpreting it. Because today, of course, you'd look at a wall like this and you'd think, okay, this must be a shady part of town because nobody's cleaning. But I just wonder, because I was not around in the 50s, nor were you, Jessa, but you have more contextual information than I do about about the state of this community at that time.
It was a hustling, bustling place, but it's also worth remembering that sometimes the griminess of a wall is because that business has been there for many, many years. And we'll talk about this printing company in a few minutes, but they had been around for 50 some years by this point. So that business was very old in the community. And yeah, sometimes things just look a little bit dusty and grimy because they've been there a long time and they haven't been painted in a while.
Gotcha. Okay.
Great.
Interesting photo. I wonder, a part of me wonders if this business is still around.
We
like
will.
Okay. I'm okay. No spoiler alerts. All right.
That's a great question. Ask in a couple minutes. Okay, Rick, there's 2 more photos I want to show everyone. So if we can move up kind of maybe to like number 9 on the clock. And this one features 2 Chinese Canadian women right in the center. And it's a vertical photograph. And they are standing in front of a shop window. At the bottom of the photo, gray concrete, and the bottom wall under the shop window looks like it's black tile with white grout. The 2 women are in the center of the photo. They're facing away from us. The woman on the right-hand side, she's standing, leaning on her left leg. She's got a light baby pink coat that kind of comes below her hips, and she's holding her purse in her right hand, just kind of against her right leg. And then she's got these short trousers that are maybe a white and gray plaid, and then black shiny shoes. And then she's got short black hair above her shoulders. On the left-hand side, the woman beside her might be a friend or family member. They seem close because she's leaning up against her. Maybe they have their arms linked, like they're very close together. And the woman on the left-hand side has a powder blue coat, very similar style, just below the hips, kind of a boxy coat. And then her trousers are short and wide, and they are dark red, looks like maybe a stripe or a checked pattern on them. And then she's got lighter red shoes. And the 2 of them are looking because they're actually looking at photos of Cantonese opera, because opera and music performances was a big part of community gatherings in the Chinese Community Association buildings around Chinatown. And so creating music and creating shows was something people loved. And so these women are looking at photos of a performance. So the shop window, it says Changhua Company in English above their heads. And then there's white Chinese characters above that. So I guess the name of the shop in both languages. And then in the shop window, you see dozens and dozens of black and white photos. So they're images of the opera, I suppose. And the women are gazing into the window.
It's an interesting photograph as you describe it, because it makes the air quotes looker, the onlooker, wonder what the relationship is between these 2. I'm going to say they're mother and daughter. I'm going to say the mother's the one in the blue coat who's sort of leaning a little bit on her daughter. It's, that kind of that sweet arm in arm thing that you do with your adult children. And I have a few friends in the Chinese community. And so I have seen this, this affection between mother and daughter quite often in my history with folks that I know in my circles that are Chinese Canadian. So that's where my heart goes. But then I wonder about this opera thing, and I wonder if they look at these photos from the opera as like, oh, we really want to go, or oh, remember we were there last week. These are the photos that we, So it feels like it could be both inclusive and non-inclusive at the same time, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah.
Are these photos to tell people what happened and what they're missing at the opera, and then to say to you, well, you weren't here. but that's sort of the mystery of the photo. And is this also a photo that is from the 1950s?
Yep, the whole collection that we're
Whole
looking
collection
at,
is.
all 50s and 60s Vancouver. Yeah.
Okay, very cool stuff.
All right, one last photo for this artist, right in the middle of the clock. And this shows the backyards of homes in Chinatown. So in the foreground, we are looking at a garden, and it's kind of it's full of lush leaves. Not sure what vegetables they are, but there's foliage and greenery near us, near our feet. And then you can see there's little pathways, a horizontal pathway, and then one moving away from us, and one more horizontal one in the distance. I mean, the whole garden is not very big. It's maybe 20 steps, 20 or 30 foot steps if you just walk straight. It's kind of that's how big the garden is. But the pathways are made with boards. So you can imagine putting boards down to make little walkways between different vegetable patches. And then on the right-hand side of this yard is a big tall fence, and there's some structures. They could be chicken coops, they could be storage crates of some kind, but there's these wooden structures that are kind of run down a little bit along the side. And then there's a back shed in the corner of the yard where maybe people keep all kinds of gardening things. And then over the tall fence, you can see small 2-story houses with ground level and then a peaked roof. So all the bedrooms are kind of underneath the eaves of these houses. They're quite small 2-story houses, but it gives you a sense of the working class neighborhoods around Chinatown then and still today. These neighborhoods, many of them have been developed in new ways, but you still do find some of these houses in downtown Vancouver on the edges. And so this gives you a sense of the backyards of families that were living in Chinatown in those years. People that grew their own vegetables and were close to their neighbors next door.
And thank you for the description of the garden. The Italians also did this. I know this because I am one. And my grandfather was notorious for laying boards down. And if you dare stepped off those boards, you were going to crush something that was going to be dinner one night, right? So I love that. It really, this idea really resonates with me of these backyard gardens and the loving, nurturing care that was put into them in order to sustain a family.
Great. Yeah, a lot of us, no matter what our cultural backgrounds or family backgrounds, a lot of us have some connection to gardens. And so we see that in this photo too. So are there any questions about any of these? Okay.
And these photographs are framed on the wall, as you said, all in white. So really, if you have any partial, if you're looking at it from a distance, it looks like 6 dark squares because they're so small, right? And so we had the opportunity to zoom in for some of our friends with partial who could make out some of the details in these photos. What is this collection saying to us, Jessa, from this artist?
So Fred Herzog, he died a couple of years ago, but for decades, he was considered this interesting gem. He was an amateur photographer, not formally trained, not trying to be a famous artist. He just loved walking around Vancouver taking photos. And there's books about him. There's been photo shows about him because he recorded everyday Vancouver, all neighborhoods, in a time when it was just after the Second World War. Vancouver was a working class industry city, a lot of imports and exports. It was different than the Olympics and the glass towers and sort of the shiny city that we have now. He was showing us a Vancouver that a lot of people who were born here and grew up here in the mid-20th century remember this Vancouver, and they say that Vancouver today seems so different and so shiny and new. So he really captured an interesting time of middle-class people here before Vancouver was this famous global city. And so it's interesting, kind of just the humble, everyday, candid quality of his photos of communities like the Chinese Canadian community and other neighborhoods over many, many years in his photographs. He took thousands of photos.
And I think it's a reminder too of where Chinatown is today and the gentrification that's happened in Chinatown and the fight to preserve some of these real historical, cultural, I don't know, icons in the community, right?
Mhm. When we get to the wooden arch sculpture at the very end, that piece and some of the artists that I'll mention there really are touching on what you're saying. So Amy,
Well, there's no time like the present, my friend.
you're just on the ball tonight.
Oh, I know almost nothing about Chinatown. Like, so this is like it's fascinating to me.
Oh, wonderful. All right, Rick, can you change the photograph for us or change the slide? Wonderful. So remember that staircase photo I showed you? There was what the printers that had their shop under, like in the basement. Well, this is this is a living artist today named Marlene Ewan. And she's one of many artists in the show who's interested in looking at history, but also wanting to really draw attention to lost history, reviving history. History is not over. It's something that still is part of us. And so the printing shop that I mentioned, that shop had been around for 100 years. And sadly, it closed in 2014. Like the family sold it and there was no one to take on the business. And so many people in the Chinese Canadian community sort of like rose to preserve some of the thousands of letterpress, like Chinese character letterpress parts and blocks that were part of this printing company. And so this artist, Marlene Ewan, she acquired a lot of those and she made this book. So what we're looking at in this photograph is a book that she made all about the history of this family business, the Ho Sun Hing printers, and the Lam family was the family that owned it for a century. So what we're looking at is a book that's for your elbow to your wrist, maybe a bit shorter than that. So it's quite a small book. Printed on it. It's a pink paper cover with a red stripe on the left-hand side that's like the spine of the book. So pink paper, red spine, and then the image in the middle is a shop front. You're looking at it head on. So it's a 2-story building. The bottom shows us the sidewalk going left to right. And then we have 2 shop windows. The one on the left seems to be barred, like maybe a garage door has been pulled down and it's a dark green, so you can't go into it. It's kind of been closed off. And then the window to the shop on the right, underneath the window is red brick. And then there's some green plants in the window. And then the background is black. And this is all a print, so it's not a photograph. So it's like she would have drawn this and then made a print of it. So it's her drawing of a 2-story shop.
And the drawing to me feels it's simplistic, right? Not overly detailed. It almost feels like a child's drawing in some ways.
Yeah, you could
right? Like there's a real innocence to it.
Nice. Sorry to interrupt. You could think of it like an illustration, like, yeah, and very little detail, mostly lines and then color. So it's almost like a children's book or a cartoon or an illustration like that.
Awesome.
And so you can imagine the 2 shop windows, and then just above there is a very horizontal awning. And on the right-hand side in green letters, it says Ho Sun Hing Printers, and it has the phone number below, 681-9642. And then it has Chinese characters in red just above, so both languages. And then the left-hand side of this awning, so above that green garage door, it talks about quality printing and presses, and that gives the address, which is on Georgia Street, so 289 East Georgia Street. And then it has that in green and then red characters above that. And then at the very top of the printed image is 3 vertical windows with curtains. The window on the right-hand side, the curtains are drawn a little bit, so there's a black gap between the 2 curtains. The middle window, it's a mostly white curtain. And then on the left-hand side, you get a sense of perhaps a blind that's been pulled down maybe 2/3 of the way. And then there's a little bit of pattern at the very bottom. So you get a sense of the windows are partially open, partially closed. And the whole building is kind of a rectangle facade of the building. And so this was the cover of this book that the artist made. And then the whole book, she printed it to talk about the story of this family that ran this printing company for over a century, 106 years in Vancouver's Chinatown.
And that, from the stories that we've shared here tonight and some of the history that I've heard of Chinatown over the years is this classic sort of shop on bottom, house, home dwelling on top.
Yeah.
Kind of live work environment for a lot of these folks.
Yeah, architecturally, and actually, Karen, we can even ask her about this later. When she laid out the show, there's 3 rooms to the show. I showed you 2 in the first photo, but she imagined each room to be like the floors of a typical building of Chinese community associations in Chinatown. The bottom floor is the business, the second floor would be apartments, and the top floor, if it had a top floor, like a 3rd floor, would be a place for community centers, operas, meetings, games. So these very vertical buildings have business and then residential and then community space on these 3 floors. And so she imagined each room of the exhibition to loosely be themed that way.
That's live, work, and play all in one building.
Indeed.
I love it. I love it. I wish we had more buildings like this.
Are there any other questions about this?
Oh, we have no hands at the moment.
All right, change the slide, please. Okay, so at the very beginning, I mentioned in that first overview that there was the wooden gate, and through the wooden gate, you can see the green wall. So we've transported ourselves into that room now, and the green wall is behind us. And we are looking through this wooden sculpture of this gate, looking all the way through, all the way basically to the front door of the gallery building. So imagine that we're standing in front of this with the mint green wall behind us, and the neon sign is behind us as well. And what we're looking at is a very tall sculpture. And it is, yeah, maybe 12 feet tall. It's taller than the ceiling of anyone's house, I think. And it's built with horizontal and vertical thin wooden pieces. It looks to me almost like a grid, if you imagine a 3D grid. And there's 3 arches. The center arch is big enough for adults to walk through. And then there's 2 smaller arches on both sides, which a child could walk through. And then the whole structure rises up. And then there's these horizontal forms that are coming out. So the roof of the gate is all like these horizontal layers. And so this is a wooden sculpture that resembles the loose shape of these majestic painted architectural gates that often feature 3 arches that go over top of the streets around the edges of a lot of Chinatowns in Canada and probably in the United States as well. And so this is like a simpler skeletal idea of that kind of majestic arched gate. And then the art piece is that, but there's also 4 tables. So there's 2 tables close to us, and each table has 1 or 2 white stools so that people can sit across from each other. So there's 2 tables and 2 stools, one on the left, one on the right. So there's 2 tables near us. And you can imagine there's also 2 more tables and stools on the other side of the arch. So there's 4 in total. The reason that we have these tables and stools is there's a game that people can play. It's a game where this artist, Linda Jung, she's in Toronto, and she wanted to pick a game where people have to think about how are you going to preserve or knock down Chinatown. So she was researching the history of Chinatown in Toronto and what's been lost, what's been knocked down, what's been developed. And so she made a game where we sit down at these small white tables and we have questions, and you have blocks in front of you, and out of 99 historic sites in Chinatown, you can only pick 10 to preserve. So what are you going to preserve? What are you going to erase? What are you going to knock down? And so each person who plays ends up trying to build a neighborhood and having to knock down some things and preserve some things. And so it's a game that people can play, an interactive artwork. And sometimes artists like to be kind of interactive with the audience so that we have to do it physically. And what we have on the table with questions, and then there's these blocks that you play with, they're like little blocks of buildings. And she also played with those blocks herself, and she made her own versions out of porcelain. And she painted them dark blues and dark browns and dark reds. And she put her porcelain versions of her Chinatowns, these little blocky sculptures. She actually put them inside the wooden gate. So there's actually almost like shelves in between each of the grids. And there's these porcelain sculptures that are perched all along the different levels of the wooden pieces that make up that gate sculpture. If this sounds a bit odd, ask anything, happy to explain it differently. What are you thinking, Amy?
I'm thinking a ton of things right now, which is, I mean, one of the things I'm thinking about is how interesting it is in terms of this game. And of course, I know that we're calling it sort of a game with air quotes, because it's not like a,
It's an art game.
yeah, it's not a game where you necessarily win or lose. But it's to provoke discussion and thought around, the next time the big developer comes through town, what is sacrificable and what is keepable in terms of preserving the history of Chinatown. And you could, as one in this circumstance, extrapolate that to any community that's being gentrified in any area, right? Like it's a conversation that we should always be having around these cultural significant spaces in all of our communities. And what I loved about this was when you and I were first sort of unpacking this particular image, you had described this gate as skeletal, which I think makes a lot of sense. This is like, you can, if you imagine the idea of the skeleton, that you can sort of see right through it. But it's also like a bookshelf. It's like a giant bookshelf with no back or front. There's just a bunch of shelves. And then on these shelves, so to speak, are these versions of the artists, the outcome of the artist, air quotes, playing the game.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so what is she telling us about her versions of Chinatown, which is such an interesting concept? Because I don't know if you can maybe do a quick count or a guesstimation, Jessa, or maybe you have it in front of you, how many actual little versions of Chinatown are included in this large sculpture.
I can see about 25. So 25 different porcelain versions of a tiny Chinatown that the artist made.
And they're painted in a dark contrasting color to the light wood of this sculpture. And so they really, really stand out. And if you're, I guess, maybe looking at it from far enough back as a sighted person, or maybe even a partial sight, because what I said was I see a bunch of black floating squares. So that's what I was like, all I see is black floating stuff. But I this whole idea that they're kind of scattered throughout, it doesn't feel to me as a onlooker, as a person who's experiencing this piece, that there's any rhyme or reason to where these little Chinatowns are placed in this sculpture. And I wonder if you know anything different than that, Jessa.
One thing I wanted is correct, because I made a small error. These porcelain models that Linda built, they're actually models of what people played. So what they came out of the visitors game playing, and then she made them solid in porcelain.
Gotcha.
So sorry, I made a small error with that.
That's okay. So these are people who have experienced this art creating their version of the Chinatown.
Yeah, and then she made
captured that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I said the principle's the same, but contextually it's different because it makes you wonder who, air quotes, played the game. Right? Like, what's the cultural significance? What's the background of the individual who played the game?
And with this game, you're allowed 10 choices out of 99. So it's a reminder of how much is being erased, how much is being knocked down. A lot of people are advocating for Chinatown in Vancouver not to be erased, and there's even signs in downtown Vancouver's, or our Chinatown, that says historic Chinatown. And a lot of advocates for Vancouver's Chinatown point out that it's not historic in a static way. It's not dead, it's not over, it's not a museum exhibit. It's a space that's very much alive and very much important for people that are living here right now. So it's not just old buildings to knock down. You're erasing so much when that's the kind of attitude that people have. So this game, no one wins in this game, and it's a lot of really difficult choices people are asked to make.
What it reminds me of is, and this is very contextual to Vancouver, so I'll share that there was a piece on the news a few weeks back now where a seniors home in Chinatown, folks who were living there were being evicted for the purpose of redevelopment. And the community rallied around this particular, notice of eviction, because of course we're in the middle of a pandemic. These were all Canadian Asian folks, seniors, that had grown up with, like, they have community in this space, and in Chinatown where they live, they have status there, they have people that love them, and they're doctors, they've got everything they need at their doorstep. And now they've been sort of arbitrarily and without a lot of notice being told that they got to move on. Sorry. we're going to
Mhm.
build something here. And so I think that that is exactly what this game is pointing to, is
Mhm.
not only the devastation of the physical buildings, but the people that depend on them,
Mhm.
that live in these communities, and the creation and the cultural connection to the communities that they're in,
Mhm.
which is hugely important. It's huge.
Hugely important. And
Yeah.
a lot of people don't think about that unless they have someone who is Chinese Canadian, who is, you know, grounding this in very lived
Yeah.
current communities. It's easy to forget until you're personally involved. So I think that shows like this that bring current voices and historic voices together are really important, because Chinatowns are not just places to go for dim sum. They're very much vitally important. And Chinese people have been in Canada since the 1750s. They've been
Mhm.
here longer than my family has been here. And my family came here in the 1800s and 1900s. So it's this reminder of how long Chinese and Asian communities have been part of this place, and yet they've been ghettoized, they've been ostracized. And in cases like this, communities that are so important are sometimes being erased
Mhm.
because of gentrification, that kind of thing. So shows like this really help us think about the current importance of these spaces.
Thank you for that. All right. I say we have one hand, and it's from Megan. So Megan, I'll let you unmute yourself and ask your question.
Are the 99 historic sites in Chinatown?
Sorry, Megan, your first part of your question cut out. So can you ask it again?
What are the 99 historic sites in Chinatown?
So these were, I mean, they were 99 game pieces. So 10 out of the 99 game pieces were in the shape of buildings in Chinatown. So she was looking at all the history of architecture in Toronto's Chinatown and then building out of that. And when Karen comes to join us for the Q&A in a couple minutes here, she can give us more detail about that as well.
Oh, okay. That'd be awesome. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Megan. All right, Jessa, I say we explore the next slide that you have.
Great. So we're going to finish with two artworks, and we're just showing you a gallery photo first, and then we're going to look at the photographs of the work up close. So this is a corner of the gallery. We can see on the left-hand side some text panels and some framed photographs just to the right of that text panel. What we're going to be focusing on is this vertical piece in the center, and it's red and yellow and pink. And we'll see in a few moments up close what it's made of. And there's also a photograph in that corner we're going to look at as well. So I'm just giving you a sense of how this room is full of many, many artworks, and we'll just highlight the last two to finish up with. So Rick, if you want to change to the next photo, we can do that. So this is a photograph in Edmonton, and this is looking at a project by Yang Fei Guan. And this is looking at an art project that was in response to the erasure of the big symbolic gate that was part of Edmonton's Chinatown. And it was knocked down in 2017 as part of plans for rapid transit. So this is a photograph of us standing in the middle of this kind of gravelly road. In front of us is a big metal gate, the kind that like the city will gate off, and you have to unlock the gate to drive through. So that gate is closed to us. It's a kind of a chain link fence gate. And on either side of the gate are these kind of sage green crates that are stacked. They're too high. And on top of it are a pair of hot pink lions made out of everyday disposable plastic. So there's one pink lion, hot pink plastic lion on the left-hand side of this chain link fence gate, and there's another lion on the right-hand side made of hot pink plastic sitting on these dark kind of sage green crates on the right-hand side. So they're symbolically reminding us of the lions that were part of the gate that was in Edmonton. Well, in this case, Yang Fei Guan has made them out of disposable plastic, and they are sort of the guardians on both sides of an installation in the center where people were invited to write down their thoughts or their responses to the loss of the gate, and then pin these little notes to the chain link fence itself. So like the community coming out to speak out against the loss of this gate, the desire to rebuild this gate, the erasure of this important site for the purpose of transportation. And then as we look through the gate, we see more kind of gravelly road going off into the distance with lampposts and buildings that are being built. And you can get a sense the whole area is under development. And this gate, unfortunately, was considered disposable in the eyes of the city.
I was just going to say that is got to be the link to the disposable plastic lions.
Exactly.
That you can, you know, you treat this monumental, beautiful historical gate like it's a, you know, a straw that you throw away after you're done your meal. It's really quite tragic when you think about it. And the more I am in art spaces and the more I get to understand what's behind some of the artwork, like as a person who would just experience this, I would never know that these were made of plastic. I would never. So it's once you provide the context that my brain goes, oh, of course, the link to the disposable plastics. It's so obvious, right? But it's, you know, for those of us who can't see the photos in the way that the photographer meant us to interpret them or experience the art and you know, without touching it and exploring it, that context is so super important.
Yeah, context always is the meat, and it helps things come alive.
Yeah, and it's really quite devastating when you think about the whole idea of the whole thing, right? The whole
it's gut wrenching.
Yeah,
absolutely gut wrenching.
It really is.
I went into Edmonton, Chinatown when I was in my teens, and I remember that gate because I'd never seen one in person.
Do we have any idea what happened to that gate? Like, was it preserved and erected somewhere else, or was it really reduced to rubble and swept in a bin?
I haven't found out. I just know that it was dismantled, but I haven't heard if, I mean, there's people want it to come back, but I'm not sure what happened to it, but I'm sure it's in the news. I bet this is all over the news, Edmonton. I hope.
Yeah. And Karen may be able to provide some context too, because it makes me wonder if it's in a storage unit somewhere, you know what I mean?
Karen just messaged me and she says it's being stored on a city site. So yes, I think Karen can give us more context shortly.
There we go. Awesome.
We can finish with one last photograph and then we can bring Karen in.
Great.
So this last photograph is basically called Love Letters to the Harbin Gate. And Rick, if you want to zoom in, what we're looking at is a wall piece that features dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds and hundreds of strips of paper that people wrote on that was part of sort of the public outcry towards the loss of that gate. And so we're seeing strips of paper that are in dark, dark red with writing in gold, a pen, people wrote in pen in characters and also in English writing on red paper with gold pens. We also see bright yellow paper with black writing. We see a it's like a salmon pink paper with black writing. And some of them say, bring the gate back, I miss it. Many of them are writing about how much that gate meant to them. So it was sort of a sea of paper that reminded us visually of the importance of this place and sort of the community wanting to bring people together and not just let the gate go silently. And so it hangs on the wall. The whole piece, this whole paper hanging is maybe 6 feet tall. It's quite extensive. And you can imagine all these papers tied to the fences, but here they've been gathered together in one grouping so they can hang in a gallery wall, but people can go up and read them in English and in Mandarin as well.
The texture almost reminds me of the wing of a bird, how the feathers might be layered on the wing of a bird.
Like layers of feathers, right? Like layers of long feathers overlapping. Or if you're someone who loves macrame and you love sort of like yarn weavings, it's kind of like layers and layers of yarn that's hanging down. But there's hundreds of these strips of paper that are all tied together in this big sculptural piece on the wall. So it's maybe from your elbow to your hand, it's maybe that wide, and then it's maybe as tall as the doorway, like a typical doorway in your house.
Just looking at a little note from the chat here from our friend Richard, of course, who has Google at his disposal, and he says, according to Google, The Edmonton Chinatown gate was put into storage.
Yes, yes. So thank you, Richard. Yeah, and Karen mentioned that in a note to me. So
Yeah.
yes, the gate is still there, and hopefully projects like this can remind the city that it's worth bringing the gate back.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see when the gate, I mean, you know, you keep something intact for a reason. So I have to, my hope is that the city is like, yep, this is historical. We have to find a place for it to live and live respectfully. But it makes me wonder where that space will be, because it may not be a space related to Chinatown at all, or maybe it's going to come back like right in the middle of this transit hub, as a reminder that this is the sacrifice we made for transit, right? Like it's an interesting conversation, and
worth following the news for sure.
Yeah, I will not be a fly on the wall when that one happens, but we'll certainly, when it pops up on the news, we'll be able to, you know, make a correlation between my experience with this artistic project and what's happening in the real world, right? It's fascinating piece. Thanks for bringing this to us, Jessa.
Oh, thank you, Karen, really.
Well, and as you know, I don't think, is this the last slide that you're sharing with us?
Yeah, we're those are all the art pieces I wanted to show you tonight. So yeah, we can.
Okay, so this is a great time to bring Karen in. I know Karen is standing in the wings, so we'll bring Karen on in and just give a moment for all the squares to adjust for folks. We're just waiting for Karen's third square to pop up. And there's Karen. Welcome, Karen, to the space. Thanks for joining us from the future. It's pretty close to, what is it, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's getting pretty close to midnight for you, but we're not there yet. You won't turn into a pumpkin just yet. Karen, share with us, and for the context of our audience, after we've experienced Who's Chinatown, this was an exhibit that you curated.
Yes.
So talk to me a bit about, you know, who you are as an artist. And this seems almost to me to be a redundant question, and I don't mean it to be redundant or insulting, but why this project? Why now?
Well, so this is the third exhibition that I've curated. So I'm kind of more from an artist background. And a lot of my own art practice revolves around looking at different interpretations, representations, or misrepresentations of Chinese culture and Chinese community, specifically like in North America. So over the past 20 years or so, I look at different kind of cultural spaces like Chinese restaurants or karaoke lounge or opium dens and Chinese Canadian, or I should say early Chinese Canadian photo studios. And so it was, you know, it's something that I've been thinking about for many years now. And the past few years, just kind of starting to think about Chinatown. And I guess because last year, I was invited by the Griffin to do a curatorial research residency. And I guess just like everything in my mind at the time, it just kind of made sense to just look at, really focus on Chinatowns. And when I'm thinking of like Chinatowns in general in Canada. And I think at the time, so this was March, at the time I was asked to kind of by a museum in Montreal to see if I could provide any background information to certain works that they were thinking of acquiring. Actually, it's like 2 of the sketches in the show. And I thought, wow, this is great. Like, I love doing historical research and looking into archives and stuff. And then it just kind of dawned on me, like, what is an art history? What is an art history of Chinatown? You know, how have Chinatowns been represented, depicted, and by who, right? So, I mean, so just from there, I was doing like initial research into what was available. to me, like to, basically someone from the public, in say like official archives and museum collections. And, what I found, there's some material, definitely not as much as I would like and what many people would like to have to be in there. Most of the materials were by or artworks were by I guess white male artists.
It's okay. You can say it.
Sorry.
You can say it.
And I mean it like the earliest stuff that I was looking at was the
Mhm.
late 19th century, and then it just made me think, like, who are some of these early, say, Chinese Canadian artists? Can we find them? Can we identify them? And once we do, are any of their artworks still exist? Do they still exist, or like how can we track them down? And so I kind of just thought this is something I want to look at, and to see if I can not exactly put together like a canon of the art history of Chinatown, but just kind of make this first steps to bringing together, works from the 1900s, through the 1930s, 50s, 70s, 80s, and like, well, 90s, basically till now, and seeing like how has our understanding of Chinatowns changed, evolved over the years, based on some of these photographs, sketches, paintings, sculptures, videos, sound works as well. So yeah, and I kind of, I was really excited when I was preparing for this show, because in a way it was an extension of my own art practice.
Mhm.
And put in the way that I approached kind of thinking about the space, and thinking about how people move through a space. And in my own installations, I always think about how the corporeal experience of space allows us to understand the history, the community that's behind, or the stories behind, the installation, the spaces that I'm looking at. So whether it's the visual, or through like I said, as you're moving through the space, if you have to duck down, or if you have to kind of go on your tiptoes, the sounds as well. Occasionally I will use scent, but I am aware too that allergies to certain smells. So I haven't done that very much. But
So
yes, when I sorry, I could just go on and on. So I'll just
that's
stop.
okay. Let's talk about this gate piece that's in this exhibition. And I mean, first of all, I guess this is a real simple question. The exact exhibition is still up, I assume, or is it not, or was it taken down, or what's the story with the status of that?
So the show sadly closed May. Oh no, I forgot. May 3rd. May 3rd.
May 3rd.
It was extended. It was supposed to end May 1st, and then it ended like May 3rd. But we are hoping, because we've been getting a lot of really positive feedback from people, like from across the country, to see if we could mount a touring show. And I think that would make sense. That would be really wonderful, because there's Chinatowns in different cities. There's Chinatowns that have disappeared as well. And so it could, it would be really nice where, for example, the one at the Griffin in North Van, that there was a bit more focus on Vancouver's Chinatown, and bringing like more Vancouver or BC based artists. So I was thinking, if we could tour the show, like each time it go, like wherever it goes, it could also reflect that city or that venue's town's history.
Mhm.
in the community and actually invite more local artists to be in. So it's kind of like evolves and develops over. So
So
fingers
this piece of the gate, because of the way it was described to us as sort of its enormity in the space, I like, this is just, it's a very logistical question, but how does a piece like that spring up in this space? Does, you know, the artist come in and like assemble it in the space, or do you, like, I'm just so curious about that process.
Yeah. So actually, like I guess the version that that was in the gallery was the almost full-sized model that
Mhm.
Linda made. Unfortunately, because of like we needed, I forget what you call it, like the right term, the safety kind of
Oh,
height
like,
you need
yeah,
from
yeah,
the
yeah, for like sprinklers and stuff.
yeah, so we kind of had to cut a few feet off
Ah,
from the top.
interesting.
So I can't remember right now like what the original kind of height of it is, but Jess is right in saying that I think it's what we have is about 12 feet. So pretty high up. I think it would be amazing to just see the full scale.
Mm-hmm.
It was just so impressive. Linda's background is as an architect. So this kind of explains a lot of like
It so does, about the
how it
game,
was
about the structure.
exactly. And how it came to us was, I forget, I think it was 2 crates, or 2 or 3 crates, and it was basically like IKEA flat pack, and it came with 5 amazing manuals of how to install, you know, with the pictograms, and she even made sort of the how-to videos because of the pandemic. She wasn't able to come install herself.
Right.
So every single step, and the tech team were amazing as well, because I was thinking I can do some of this, but like not in the time frame that we have. If you gave me like a month, maybe I would get through half of the gate. Yeah, and it's just like a wonderful piece because it's like Jessa was saying, it brings community together. It makes us think about what is worth preserving, who gets to make those decisions as well, and for the game pieces, if we can say, what Linda had done was 3D scanned 99 buildings in Toronto's Chinatown, and then replicated them, you know, as 3D in plastic. Yeah, I don't. I guess there's like a lot more that we can talk about, but I guess the main thing is to think of for us to think about future heritage.
Right.
Mm.
Right. Of course. A reminder, friends, that you can raise your hands at any time if you have questions for Jessa or for Karen. And we do have a hand from, oh boy.
It's me, Karen Lerner.
Karen. Yeah, from Karen. Sorry, I had a hard time. There's so many letters there, Karen. I had a hard time. And then I was like, wait a minute, is that Karen? No. So Karen, please ask your question. Yeah, it's a blind moment. I'm sorry.
Never apologize. Never apologize. This has been just fabulous, and I'm so appreciative of everyone coordinating this program and bringing it to us. I've really enjoyed it today. Thank you. My question for you, Karen, is this was probably about 20 years or so, so my facts might be a little distorted, but I remember watching a program on heritage and architecture, and I believe it may have been I know it was the East Coast of the US, and it could have been around Boston, Mass. My understanding is because that some of the most earliest architecture of the US, that a portion of those buildings are to be, the heritage buildings are to be incorporated into new builds. Do you know if there's any type of laws on the books as far as new builds around old architecture anywhere across Canada?
Thanks for your question. I'm afraid I don't know enough to even, venture like I guess. I would just assume so, but I mean, I'm sorry, I can't give you an answer.
Well, that's not a problem at all, because I think that would be a fabulous thing to be able to encourage our builders to or even our cities to ensure that we do keep that heritage and within our communities, because it's so easy to pull everything down. I often think of going back to Europe and really love looking at all the historical buildings. And even when you look back to the First World War, of many of the cities even keeping the structures with damage, bullet holes in the buildings, to be able to talk about this is part of our past. So I would maybe that's something to advocate.
That's a great question, Karen. And the big, from what I know and working with developers and municipalities just on the North Shore around heritage buildings of all kinds, but the big I guess debate that comes from the development community is that they're not designed, the heritage buildings aren't designed as earthquake proof. So it's very difficult to put that structure in so that if there's an earthquake, and of course we're on a fault line, that it doesn't just crumble down and take everybody with it. And so I think there's been this appetite towards taking down the old because it's not, air quotes, to code, and not incorporating it. But I think that that's a great challenge for an architectural team, is to be able to figure out how we can preserve these buildings either in part or in their entirety, so that there is acknowledgement that they once stood here, for whatever community that's important to, because I think there are lots of communities where we're losing historical pieces of, reference to those areas. And how do we keep that alive? And how do we keep Vancouver and other metropolitan cities from being simply the glass high rises, which in turn will be changed to something else 100 years from now, right? Like, how do we take that history with us and keep incorporating it as we go along, so we're not forgetting about these communities? Because I think that's a part of our legacy, a part of our story here in Canada. And Canada, I can only speak for Canada. We've been quick to erase some of those histories, in my experience. So thank you, Karen, for your question. We've got a hand from Megan as well. So Megan, I'll get you to unmute.
I have a couple questions. Where is the Chinatown in Edmonton, and what are the 99 historic sites in Chinatown, and where is Kuo Kong Silks in Vancouver?
Okay, that's 3 questions, Karen, for you. Do you remember them all? Do you know whereabouts the Chinatown in Edmonton is located? I guess from the picture,
Yeah.
I guess the Chinatown that was where the gate was removed from.
I've never been to Edmonton.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you'll have to Google map that one, Megan.
Yeah, I think I might have to.
And then Megan was asking about the she'd asked this previously about these 99 pieces.
Right. Yes.
And if you had any kind of examples of what those 99 pieces might be.
Well, she'd taken the models are based on 99 existing buildings in Toronto's Chinatown, so that they would, they range from like the society or association buildings to residential houses, to just different buildings.
Yeah, so probably some shops that had been there for 100 years that were,
Yeah.
you know, owned, like family generations had owned them, those kinds of properties.
Exactly.
I almost think about them when you said that they were made from a 3D model. It almost reminded me a bit like the little game pieces in Monopoly, right? Like the idea is that, you know, you've got this representation, but you can only choose, you know, 10 of them.
Yeah.
And that choice is like it's almost impossible to make. And then Karen or Megan's third question had to do with, so this was Vancouver's Chinatown. But the flags that were hanging from the silk shop and where the silk shop might be, and do we even know if the silk shop is still around? Because that photo was taken in the 50s.
So I've just looked it up because of all the wonderful research that Karen did with the team at Griffin. So it says that the Quokon silk was founded in, well, long ago, but they were in business for about 70 years. So it doesn't look like they still are in business. But they were around for much of the 20th century.
Thanks, Megan, for your questions. Appreciate them.
You're welcome. Oh, and I also forgot the address for the gallery in North Van, because
Yeah, do you have an idea of what, I mean, you came to North Van, Karen. Do you know approximately what the area was that the physical gallery space was?
I don't know what it's called. It on Welch.
This is Sarah.
On Welch.
And it's kind of one of the it's perpendicular to Pemberton.
That's it's quite an industrial area, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. I live in North Van, guilty. So I know that area well. It's quite an industrial. There's a lot of like there's some railroad tracks back there behind those buildings. There's like some landscaping stuff where you can, this will resonate with Christy, where you can buy rocks and bark mulch and whatever to have delivered to your property. So there's quite a lot of industrial stuff back there.
And not far from the water. It looks like, I'm just checking Google Maps, looks like it's close-ish to the water.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting choice for a gallery space. And I wasn't aware that there was a gallery space. So I guess a part of me wonders if it is always utilized as a gallery space, and so there's always different stuff there, or if it was just chosen specifically for this project.
Oh, it's the gallery was founded, I think, in 2015. The founder owns the building.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to make a closer inspection the next time I go out for groceries, because it's literally right in my hood.
There's
okay.
views on the top floor.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Thanks for your question, Megan. We've got another hand from Rita, so I'll let Rita unmute herself. Ask her question.
Okay. So this is a really very basic question, but both in the write-up for this show and it was mentioned that the Chinese started coming to Canada in the 1750s. Where did they go, and what part of the country did they come to and stuff like that? And what capacity did they come in? Do you know historically?
So the 1750s, that would be Captain Meares, Meares, had, okay, I'm a little fuzzy right now, but with this part of the history.
I remember part of it, you remember part of it. My grad research is like coming back, so I'll try to help you if you get stuck.
Okay.
He came, I don't remember why, from
I think it was a trade. It was like a trade agreement, and so it was like an agreement that like Chinese laborers would come. So it was early trade between England and China and the new English Commonwealth.
Yeah.
Right.
And so he brought like Chinese artisans who and arrived on the West Coast. And we don't know too much about what happened to the Chinese artisans after, but it's, I think I remember reading that they might have married into the indigenous
Oh, okay.
community.
Mhm.
And then later on, the Chinese came mostly from the southern part of China, came because of the gold rush. So the gold rush in America first, and then kind of coming up north to the gold rush in Canada.
Right.
And then afterwards, another wave came for the building of the railroad.
Right. I knew about the railroad and the gold rush. I just didn't know about this thing before that. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Rita. It's always good to get a little context around our history.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other questions that sort of popped up, and I see we have a hand, but I'm gonna throw this question out there, and then we'll get David to unmute himself. Was around these gates at the entrances of Chinatowns, and so we were kind of contemplating amongst ourselves the significance of these gates, whether they were celebratory, whether they were to keep folks in, keep folks out. Like, so maybe can you give us some context around these beautiful, ornate, huge gates and what their meaning and purpose was all about?
So these gates that we associate with like Chinatowns, the welcome gates, they're actually traditional architectural structures in China.
Mhm.
And that have been, I guess, in a way transposed to the Chinatowns in North America and elsewhere. And in a way, yes, that, it's kind of, I think you can see it in two ways. One is as welcoming, and then one is sort of these demarcations of the boundaries. I'm going to just take an example of Montreal's Chinatown, where we have 4 gates, and they, in a way, kind of demarcate how Chinatown shrank. Chinatown was much bigger than it is today. Like many cities, the neighborhood was expropriated by various levels of government. And then there were like constructions of the convention center, construction of the highway that even shrank it even more. So yeah, so in a way it's kind of also stating like this is the boundary. You could think of it as like this is the safe space for the community, but it's also
Do not build any of your Western stuff in these boundaries. I appreciate that very much, because I think, yeah, again, I be careful with my words, but I think that, as cities grow, there's this take, right? Where can we house more people? Where can we put more people? And there are always sacrifices to be made. And it's about choosing. It's the same conversation we have around environmental issues, right? When somebody wants to build a highway through a forest. And so where are the sacrifices, and where are we as human beings sort of allowing those the lines, the boundaries of these sacrifices to be made? When is it too much? When is it not enough? When is it just right? Those are really, really big questions, bigger than maybe we can answer in this one particular space. But I appreciate the context of these gates that have created this very significant, like, this is as far as we'll allow you to build. You are not taking any more of, in this case, Chinatown away from this community.
Except it is happening.
Except
it is happening.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like in many Chinatowns, like in Montreal, like I feel like we're slightly behind, what's been happening with the Chinatowns in Vancouver and Toronto, but we are catching up now. So there's a couple of like luxury condo being built. That's 2 of them are like butting up against 2 of the gates.
Oh.
Yeah, and then there's like a couple of weeks ago, it came to light that this real estate developer who has a very bad reputation just bought a historic block,
right,
the oldest part of Chinatown, we don't know what the plan
Yeah,
is.
anytime somebody buys a block, you know, they tend to do something with it.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm a little devastated to hear that, because I really believe in the preservation of neighborhoods and culture, and
Mhm.
it saddens me to think that we're losing that, like, bit by bit, day by day, right? I'll allow David to have the floor. David, please unmute yourself.
Hi there. Hey, Karen, I wonder if you could just talk about the racism that kept the Chinese in Chinatown. Racism really is why Chinatown developed, when you think about it as a ghetto, economically and culturally and language-wise. It's changed here in Vancouver, is no longer in Chinatown, it's Richmond. And it doesn't have the same vibe that it used to, and it was a really tight little spot. But racism was so bad back then. Was that the same everywhere?
I from the research that I've done, yes. Like, yes is the short answer. I mean, there are so many ways where the Chinese community were ghettoized. If we take, for example, I think Nanaimo's Chinatown, which doesn't exist, there were like, it was the same one, but it moved 4 times due to like pressure from, I guess, the more mainstream community who, you know, wanted them to move, or else like one of the Chinatowns, one of the Nanaimo Chinatowns was destroyed in a fire. So there's that. Like other ways that there's like city bylaws, for example. I'm going to take Montreal as an example just because I'm most familiar with it, that that Chinatown can't really expand east because that's like a residential zone. You know, and you know, that's one example. And then what I said earlier about, you know, on the south side, it's Old Montreal. Right? It's sort of like the Ottawa and then the Old Montreal. On the west side, I forget, but there was something. And then north, it's you know, it can't really expand unless it expands north. So
have the Chinatowns, did they all develop around the same time and stay static more or less in that, within those boundaries up to today? When you talk about the New York Chinatown or the Montreal Chinatown or the Toronto Chinatown?
Well, the oldest Chinatown in Canada is Victoria. And then, I mean, I think the Chinese settlement was first, you know, in the West Coast, and then kind of moved eastward. One of the reasons for that was to, you know, was that there were less Chinese, so you know, you could open up a restaurant or a laundry business and you wouldn't have as much competition. But another reason was because of the racism that they were experiencing, overt racism. So by moving, you know, east, the idea was that you know, you would face less, which unfortunately wasn't the case.
Yeah. I'm not a racialized person, but I would guess that has probably been a theme when people like moved to Canada, was like, okay, we'll settle here, and then, oh no, we're gonna move, oh, and then you just keep finding it everywhere you go, right?
Yeah.
Because nothing changes about who you are, and nothing changes necessarily about the places you go. You're still expanding in this European nation that doesn't quite get it. And I think that probably still happens today to a large extent. You know, maybe our thinking around it is different, but I think fundamentally it's the same concept. Truly is.
The Stop Asian Hate campaigns that are happening now are reminding us that racism is very much alive and well. And I remember when I was getting into this with grad research and studying Karen's practice, like learning about like the race riots, 1907 in Vancouver, and there was like "White Canada Forever" songs that people were singing, like so overtly racist, and then the pandemic has stirred up a lot of anti-Asian violence, and we're talking about it. Yes, we're talking about it. So these Chinatown spaces, yeah, they came out of that, and then of course they've grown to mean so much more than simply a safe space in the face of racism. But I think it's so important, as David was mentioning, that we remember that that's part of these spaces. If Canada had been totally inclusive, people might not have needed to band together in a small neighborhood to feel safe.
There's a very interesting show on Netflix that you can find. It's called The Chinese Exclusion Act. That's quite fascinating to watch. It's done in an American perspective, but it mirrors Canada. Interesting enough, the last thing I'm going to say, I was just looking at Wikipedia, looking at the ethnic origins in Vancouver. Chinese, 20.6%, English, 19.4%. That's interesting.
It doesn't surprise me. You know, I think the part of the beautiful thing of being in a city like this is that there is so much for me, there is so much multiculturalism here. And I really enjoy that about our neighborhoods and about, you know, going into my local shops and patronizing my local businesses that are run by families, whether they are Italian families or Chinese families or Iranian families. There's this real beautiful fabric of these communities that are starting to knit together. Not starting, but you know what I mean. Sometimes it feels like we've come so far, and then sometimes it feels like we have way so far to go. And so we're kind of in this limbo period where, you know, a lot of progress has been made in lots of equity seeking groups, but we still have a long way to go. And those of us who are familiar with fighting for equity around ableism and discrimination around disability also know that we tend to silo in our own equity seeking groups too. And we have a really loud voice if we come together. So thank you, Karen, for joining us for this Q&A and providing us with your knowledge and your background and your artistry. It's really, really lovely to have you, you know, kind of hold our hands a little bit through this exhibit. And thank you, Jessa, again, so much for just bringing this to this group of folks and taking us through it step by step and describing it to us and allowing us to ask questions as we go, because that's really part of the process. When you don't see the images the way that that sighted folks see them, you kind of need to ask the questions. So thanks for giving us the space for that. But before I officially let you walk away for the evening, we do have a draw. I do have to mention that we have a draw. And so friends on the line, the draw tonight is for tickets to the AEBC fundraiser. It's a trivia night coming up on May the 29th. And so these are, we've got 4 tickets. We're going to do 2 draws. So you'll win a set of 2 tickets. And then the second draw, you'll win a set of 2 tickets. Trivia night is a ton of fun. I've participated in them before, and I'm going to participate in this one too. So whoever wins the tickets, you'll have fun at trivia. And if you can't use them, then maybe you've got, you know, a Mother's Day gift that you missed out on giving, or a birthday that's coming up or something. So let's start with our special guest, Karen. We'll get you to do the first draw. So Sarah, pop on in. I think I saw a square and then a square disappeared, but Sarah, pop back on in.
I am right here. Hi.
Awesome. So Karen, do you have a special word? Like, you know, we were just, you know, yelling out stop, but if you have a special, you know, word that you'd like to yell out, I don't know what, I don't know. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah.
Okay. Sarah laughed. Sarah, does that mean something to you?
Karen, you're giving me so much anxiety. I hear this every day at home. That's okay. I like it. Okay, so Karen, I'm just going to shuffle the names. Whenever you're ready, please say the magic word.
Okay. Yeah.
Our first winner is Doug and Diana Brent.
Ooh, Doug and Diana, congratulations. All right.
Right. Okay. And then
so Jessa's going to do the second draw.
Jessa, okay.
Yeah, as well.
You can choose whatever word you want. That's the fun of the space. You can yell out pumpkin if you want to. It doesn't matter to me.
Oh my goodness. Okay, roll the dice.
Yep. Ready,
Yeah.
Our second winner is Sandra Bell.
We got Sandra with us still?
I think we do.
Awesome. All right. Well, that was Doug and Diana, which I always assume is really just Diana. She's our community member, and Sandra. So congratulations to you both. We will find a way of getting you those tickets, likely through your email inbox. And you can use them to your heart's content, either attending trivia or gifting them to somebody. They're $40 value for the fundraiser for each winner. So I hope to see you all at trivia. I should say I hope to kick your behinds all at trivia, but my trivia skills are rusty. So I will participate and have fun, but I don't expect to win. Thanks everybody for your thoughts and your generosity of spirit tonight and sharing your lived experience. Really appreciate that. Karen, I know you're joining us from the future, so you are welcome to go and visit Slumberland. Do whatever you need to do as part of your nighttime routine. So, and folks in the community, if you want to stick around and socialize for another 10 or 15 minutes, more than welcome to keep the line open for that. So thanks for joining us for This is Chinatown.